Part 2 of Little Snow White, written by Grimm's Fairy Tales, read by Austin Hayman. When she heard that, all her blood rushed to her heart with fear, for she saw plainly that little Snow White was again alive. "But now," she said, "I will think of something that shall really put an end to you." And by the help of witchcraft, which she understood, she made a poisonous comb. Then she disguised herself and took the shape of another old woman. So she went over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs, knocked at the door, and cried, "Good things to sell? Cheap, cheap." Little Snow White looked out and said, "Go away! I cannot let anyone in." "I suppose you can look," said the old woman, and pulled the poisonous comb out and held it up. It pleased the girl so well that she let herself be beguiled and opened the door. When they had made a bargain, the old woman said, "Now I will comb you properly for once." Poor little Snow White had no suspicion, and let the old woman do as she pleased. But hardly had she put the comb in her hair than the poison in it took effect, and the girl fell down senseless. "You paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "you are finished now." And she went away. But fortunately it was almost evening, when the 7 dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White lying as if dead upon the ground, they at once suspected the stepmother. They looked and found the poisoned comb. Scarcely had they taken it out when Snow White came to herself and told them what had happened. Then they warned her once more to be upon her guard and to open the door to no one. The queen, at home, went in front of the looking-glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" Then it answered as before, "O Queen, thou art fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is so fair as she." When she heard the glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with rage. "Snow White shall die," she cried, "even if it costs me my life." Thereupon she went into a quite secret lonely room where no one ever came, and there she made a very poisonous apple. Outside it looked pretty, white, with a red cheek, so that everyone who saw it longed for it, but whoever ate a piece of it must surely die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and dressed herself up as a farmer's wife, and so she went over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door. Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I cannot let anyone in. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me." "It is all the same to me," answered the woman. "I shall soon get rid of my apples. There, I will give you one." "No," said Snow White, "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the old woman. "Look, I will cut out the apple into 2 pieces. You eat the red cheek, and I will eat the white." The apple was so cunningly made that only the red cheek was poisoned. Snow White longed for the fine apple, and when she saw that the woman ate part of it, she could resist no longer, and stretched out her hand and took the poison's half. But hardly had she had a bit of it in her mouth than she fell down dead. Then the queen looked at her with a dreadful look, and laughed aloud, and said, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood. This time the dwarfs cannot wake you up again." And when she asked of the looking-glass at home, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" it answered at last, "O Queen, in this land thou art fairest of all." Then her envious heart had rest, so far as an envious heart can have rest. The dwarfs, when they came home in the evening, found Snow White lying upon the ground. She breathed no longer, and was dead. They lifted her up, looked to see whether they could find anything poisonous, unlaced her, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but it was all of no use. The poor child was dead, and remained dead. They laid her upon a bier, and all 7 of them sat round it and wept for her, and wept 3 days long. Then they were going to bury her, but still she looked as if she were living, her pretty red cheeks. They said, "We could not bury her in the dark ground," and they had a transparent coffin of glass made, so that she could be seen from all sides, and they laid her in it, and wrote her name upon it in golden letters, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they put the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always stayed by it and watched it. Birds came and wept for Snow White, first an owl, then a raven, and at last a dove. And now Snow White lay a long, long time in the coffin, and she did not change, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that a king's son came into the forest, and went to the dwarf's house to spend the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain, and the beautiful Snow White within it, and read what was written upon it in golden letters. Then he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it." But the dwarfs answered, "We would not part with it for all the gold in the world." Then he said, "Let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honour and prize her as my dearest possession." As he spoke in this way, the good dwarfs took pity on him, and gave him the coffin. And now the king's son had it carried away by his servants on their shoulders, and it happened that they stumbled over a tree stump, and with the shock the poisonous piece of apple which Snow White had bitten off came out of her throat. Before long she opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, sat up, and was once more alive. "Oh, heavens! Where am I?" she cried. The king's son, full of joy, said, "You are with me." And he told her what had happened, and said, "I love you more than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And Snow White was willing, and went with him. And their wedding was held with great show and splendour. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also bidden to the feast. When she had arrayed herself in beautiful clothes, she went before the looking-glass, and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The glass answered, "O queen, of all here the fairest art thou, but the young queen is fairer by far, as I trow." Then the wicked woman uttered a curse, and was so wretched, so utterly wretched, that she knew not what to do. At first she would not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace, and had to go and see the young queen. And when she went in and recognized Snow White, she stood still with rage and fear, and could not stir. But iron slippers had already been put upon the fire, and they were brought in with tongs and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red-hot shoes and dance, until she dropped down dead. And so ends Snow White. And now it is time for all little children to go to sleep. Good night.